It was late, and I was sitting in the quiet hum of my study, surrounded by spreadsheets and reports. I stared at the monitor, the glow casting shadows across the desk. The deadline for this project loomed like a storm cloud, and I had buried myself in work for weeks. My wife, Lily, had stopped coming into this room to check on me. There was an unspoken tension between us, a rift that seemed to widen with every passing day. Lily's voice echoed faintly from the living room. She was talking on the phone, her tone animated. It wasn't directed at me, but it tugged at something deep inside, a reminder of how things used to be. We used to talk like that, laugh like that. Now, silence was our default. Earlier that evening, I had caught her staring at me across the dining table. I looked up briefly, but her eyes quickly dropped to her plate. She muttered something about going to bed early, but I knew she wouldn't sleep. I heard her pacing upstairs while I worked late into the night. Something had to change, but I didn't know where to start. The distance wasn't always there. We had a spark once, one that lit up every corner of our lives. But somewhere along the line, the responsibilities and routines snuffed it out. My job was demanding, and I convinced myself it was for us, for our future. Lily had been understanding at first. She'd make jokes about being a work widow and bring me coffee late at night. But the jokes stopped, and the coffee cups disappeared. Now, there were just strained glances and half-hearted goodnights. Then came the first shock, a text. It was around midnight when my phone buzzed. Lily had left hers on the kitchen counter, and I happened to glance at the screen as I walked by. It was a message from someone named Elliot. The tone was casual, but something about it caught my attention. "Hope you're doing okay. Let me know if you want to talk." I stood there for a moment, the message lighting up the dark kitchen. My stomach twisted, but I told myself it was probably innocent. A friend? A colleague? I wasn't sure. But I also couldn't shake the knot in my chest as I returned to my study. I tried to focus on work, but my mind kept circling back to that text. The following days were marked by small discoveries. Lily seemed happier, almost lighter. She started dressing differently, clothes I hadn't seen her wear in years. Bright colors, fitted blouses. She smiled more, though not at me. At night, she'd take her phone to bed, tilting the screen away from me. If I asked her about her day, she'd shrug and give vague answers, as though I wasn't entitled to the details anymore. One evening, I decided to confront her. She was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone. I sat beside her, the cushions sinking under my weight. "Who's Elliot?" I asked, keeping my voice even. Her fingers froze mid-scroll. For a moment, she didn't look at me. Then she turned, her expression unreadable. "A friend," she said simply, almost dismissively. "From where?" "From the gym," she replied, her tone clipped. "We've been in the same yoga class for months." "He's just a friend, Alex?" I wanted to believe her. But the way she said it, the edge of defiance in her voice, left me cold. I nodded and let it go, though my mind raced with questions. Days turned into weeks, and the tension became unbearable. I began to notice patterns. She'd spend hours at the gym, far longer than her usual workouts. She'd leave early in the mornings and come back flushed, claiming she grabbed coffee with friends. On one such morning, I checked her phone while she was in the shower. My hands trembled as I scrolled through her messages. There was nothing outright damning, but the exchanges with Elliot were frequent. He seemed supportive, kind, and attentive, all the things I hadn't been. Then one Saturday, Lily mentioned a work retreat. It was sudden, and she seemed unusually eager to go. Her bag was packed quickly, and she avoided my eyes as she kissed me goodbye. The house felt emptier than ever that weekend. But something didn't sit right. I called her workplace to confirm the retreat. The receptionist paused before saying, "We don't have anything like that scheduled." I hung up, my heart pounding. The pieces began to fall into place, and they painted an ugly picture. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the evidence was mounting. When Lily returned, I asked her how the retreat went. She hesitated before giving a generic response, her smile too forced. That night, I checked her car's GPS history. There was no record of the retreat location, only an address in a part of town I didn't recognize. The address led me to a quiet cafe. The kind of place you'd go for a private conversation. Or a date. I didn't confront her that night. Instead, I sat in the dark living room, replaying every moment of our relationship. When did I lose her? Or worse, had I driven her away? The next morning, I woke up determined to fix things. I suggested we spend the day together, go for a hike or visit her favorite gallery. She agreed, but the enthusiasm wasn't there. It felt like we were playing roles in a script that had long lost its meaning. During lunch, her phone buzzed on the table. She picked it up quickly, her cheeks coloring as she glanced at the screen. She put it face down without a word. That was the final straw. "Lily," I said, my voice steady. "Are you happy?" Her fork paused midair. She set it down carefully and looked at me, her eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place. Guilt? Sadness? Both? "I don't know," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. We sat in silence, the weight of her words settling between us. There was no shouting, no accusations. Just the stark reality of what we had become, two strangers occupying the same space, both yearning for something we couldn't quite define. And yet, despite everything, I still wanted to try. The house buzzed with the kind of energy I hadn't felt in a long time. Lily had insisted we attend this party, one hosted by a mutual friend, though I wasn't in the mood for socializing. Work had been relentless, and the growing distance between us left me feeling too hollow to pretend everything was fine. But Lily had been unusually excited, almost insistent. I gave in more out of guilt than interest. Maybe this could be a chance to reconnect, I told myself. Maybe we could salvage something tonight. She spent hours getting ready, emerging from the bedroom in a dress I hadn't seen in years. It hugged her figure, the deep emerald green bringing out her eyes in a way that momentarily took my breath away. She caught me staring and smiled, not at me. It was a smile meant for herself, an acknowledgement of how good she looked. She didn't ask for my opinion, didn't wait for me to compliment her. She grabbed her purse and said, "Ready?" The party was already in full swing by the time we arrived. The music thumped in the background, loud enough to make conversation an effort but not so loud it drowned the chatter. I spotted a few familiar faces, colleagues, acquaintances, but Lily didn't stick by my side long enough for us to navigate the room together. She was off, weaving through the crowd with an ease I envied. I followed her, trying to keep up, but it was clear she had her own agenda tonight. That's when I saw him. He was tall, maybe a few years younger than me, with the kind of effortless confidence that filled a room without trying. I noticed Lily spot him too. Her face lit up in a way it hadn't in my presence for months, maybe years. She walked straight to him, her posture changing, shoulders back, chin slightly raised. She laughed at something he said, tossing her hair over her shoulder. It was the kind of laugh that felt like a dagger to my chest, carefree and full of interest. I grabbed a drink and tried to act natural, but my eyes kept drifting back to them. She touched his arm lightly as she spoke, her hand lingering a moment too long. He leaned in, close enough that their heads nearly touched. The scene played out in a cruel slow motion, and I couldn't tear my gaze away. I told myself I was imagining things. It's just friendly banter, I thought. She's being polite. But the more I watched, the more obvious it became that this wasn't politeness. This was Lily the way she used to be with me, flirty, engaged, fully present. And I was the man standing in the corner with a drink, invisible in his own marriage. As the night went on, she didn't even try to include me. At one point, I approached her, attempting to join their conversation. She barely acknowledged me, offering a distracted smile before turning back to Eric. He greeted me with a polite nod, but his focus was all on her. The two of them spoke in a way that excluded everyone else in the room. I might as well have been furniture. "Alex, could you grab me another drink?" Lily asked suddenly, her tone casual but dismissive. I stood there for a second, stunned. "Sure," I muttered, retreating to the bar. While I waited for the bartender, I caught glimpses of them across the room. She was leaning against the wall, her body angled toward him. She laughed again, her hand briefly brushing his shoulder. It wasn't just jealousy coursing through me, it was anger, hurt, and a profound sense of helplessness. I wanted to march over there, pull her aside, and demand to know what the hell she was doing. But what would I even say? I could already picture her brushing it off, accusing me of overreacting. By the time I returned with her drink, she was gone. I scanned the room, searching for that emerald dress, but she and Eric were nowhere to be seen. My mind raced, imagining scenarios I didn't want to consider. I wandered through the house, weaving past clusters of people laughing and talking. Finally, I spotted them on the patio, standing apart from the crowd. The door was slightly ajar, and I stood just inside, unseen. She was laughing softly, her voice carrying over the faint hum of music. Eric said something and she tilted her head, looking up at him with a coy smile. I couldn't hear their exact words, but their body language said everything I needed to know. I clenched my fists, every nerve in my body urging me to intervene. But I stayed rooted to the spot, unsure of how to act. What was I supposed to do? Cause a scene? Drag her away? The truth was, I didn't know if I had the right anymore. She wasn't mine, not in the way she used to be. That realization hit harder than anything else. Eventually, Eric stepped back, breaking the moment. Lily adjusted her dress, brushing invisible lint from the fabric, and turned toward the door. I moved quickly, heading back into the crowd before she could see me. When she re-entered the party, her expression was calm, almost smug. She spotted me near the bar and walked over, her face betraying nothing. "Thanks for the drink," she said, taking the glass from my hand. I stared at her, trying to read her expression. Was she testing me? Taunting me? Or was I imagining all of it? I wanted to confront her, to ask her outright what the hell she was doing. But I didn't. I just stood there, watching her sip the drink I'd brought her, pretending everything was fine. The rest of the night passed in a blur. Lily floated through the party like a queen holding court, charming everyone in her path, except me. When it was finally time to leave, she barely spoke to me on the ride home. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, my knuckles white, as the silence filled the car. That night, as we lay in bed, I stared at the ceiling, the events of the evening replaying in my mind. Lily turned away from me, her breathing slow and steady. I knew she wasn't asleep, but she didn't say a word. Neither did I. The distance between us had never felt greater. The following weeks after the party were suffocating. Every moment I spent with Lily felt like a tug-of-war between the version of her I thought I knew and the stranger she seemed to be becoming. She was distant, physically present but emotionally gone. Conversations turned into surface-level exchanges about groceries or dinner plans. The way she looked at me, when she bothered to look at me, was different. Detached. Cold. And Eric. His name lingered in my mind like a splinter. At first, I didn't want to admit how much it bothered me. I told myself I was overthinking, letting my imagination run wild. But the way they behaved at the party, the way she lit up around him, it wasn't something I could forget. It felt too deliberate, too intimate. I'd been reduced to an observer in my own marriage. One morning, I woke to find Lily already dressed and slipping her phone into her bag. She was heading out early, she said, a vague excuse about needing fresh air and time to herself. She hadn't even waited for me to wake up, let alone invite me along. I watched her from the bedroom window as she drove off, her car disappearing down the street. Something about the way she left felt off, but I bit my tongue and tried not to jump to conclusions. The unease gnawed at me. That same night, I decided to check her phone while she was in the shower. My heart pounded as I unlocked it, the familiar guilt of invading her privacy almost stopping me. But I couldn't ignore the knot in my stomach. I went straight to her messages, scrolling through conversations with friends and family, finding nothing out of the ordinary, until I came across a chat labeled E. It had to be Eric. My fingers hesitated for a moment before opening the thread. What I saw wasn't explicit, but it was damning in its own way. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Last night was amazing. You make me feel alive again." Her responses were just as telling. Casual flirtations, compliments, playful emojis. She'd been hiding this from me, and now there it was, staring back at me in black and white. I wanted to throw the phone across the room, but instead, I placed it back on the nightstand, my hands trembling. When she emerged from the bathroom, smiling faintly as she towel-dried her hair, I couldn't bring myself to look at her. I stayed quiet, my mind racing with questions. The following days were a blur of suspicion and paranoia. Lily began going out more often, always with the same flimsy excuses, meeting friends, errands, needing time alone. She was careful to keep her phone with her at all times, never leaving it unattended like she used to. She'd grown skilled at dodging my questions, her tone clipped whenever I pried too much. I started tracking her patterns. She left the house at odd hours, always dressed just a little too carefully for casual errands. Once I followed her. It felt ridiculous, like something out of a cheap detective novel, but I needed to know. I kept my distance as her car wove through the city streets until she pulled into a parking lot near a small cafe. My heart sank when I saw him step out of his car. They greeted each other like old friends, but there was something intimate in the way he touched her arm, the way they leaned in as they spoke. They sat at a table by the window, laughing and talking like nothing else in the world mattered. I stayed in my car, watching them through the glass, every minute feeling like a dagger to my chest. When she came home that evening, her mood was light, almost cheerful. She hummed to herself as she cooked dinner, completely oblivious to the storm raging inside me. I wanted to confront her right then and there, to throw it all on the table and demand answers. But a part of me was afraid of what she'd say. Afraid of confirming what I already knew. Instead, I started collecting evidence. I checked her phone whenever I got the chance, screenshotting messages and saving them to my email. I logged her GPS history, noting the addresses she visited. Each discovery only deepened the chasm between us, but I couldn't stop. I needed to understand the full scope of her betrayal. One evening, I decided to confront her indirectly. We were sitting in the living room, the TV playing some mindless show in the background. She was scrolling through her phone, barely acknowledging me. "Do you ever think about us?" I asked suddenly, my voice breaking the silence. She looked up, startled. "What do you mean?" Do you think about how we got here? About how things have changed between us?" Her expression softened, but not in the way I hoped. It was more pity than anything else. "Of course I do, Alex. But things have been hard. You've been so distant. Caught up in work. It feels like we've both stopped trying." Stopped trying. The words stung, especially coming from her. The hypocrisy of it was almost laughable. I wanted to tell her I'd seen the messages, that I knew about Eric, but I held back. I needed more. The final confirmation came a week later. She left the house in the afternoon, claiming she was meeting an old friend for coffee. I followed her again, keeping a careful distance. This time, they met at a park. I watched from a nearby bench as they strolled along the path, their hands brushing occasionally. When they reached a secluded spot near the lake, she turned to him, her face lighting up in a way I hadn't seen in years. And then she kissed him. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. My stomach churned, and my hands clenched into fists at my sides. I wanted to march over there, to scream at her, at him, at the world. But instead, I just sat there, frozen, watching the life I thought I had unravel before my eyes. When she came home that evening, I was waiting for her in the kitchen. She smiled as she walked in, but her expression faltered when she saw my face. "Alex? What's wrong?" she asked, feigning innocence. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I pulled out my phone and placed it on the counter. The screen lit up with one of the photos I'd taken of her and Eric at the park. Her eyes widened, her face draining of color. "I know," I said quietly. She didn't deny it. Didn't try to explain. She just stood there, silent, as the weight of her betrayal filled the room. And in that silence, everything we once had crumbled. That night, I couldn't hold back any longer. The weight of everything, her lies, her distance, Eric, pressed on my chest like a boulder. I sat in the living room, waiting for her to come home. My leg bounced nervously, and I felt like a spring wound too tightly, ready to snap. The clock on the wall ticked with excruciating slowness. When her car finally pulled into the driveway, I rose to my feet, rehearsing the words I'd been turning over in my mind for hours. The front door opened, and she stepped inside, pausing when she saw me standing there. She was holding her coat and purse, her hair slightly tousled, and her cheeks faintly pink from the cold. Her smile faltered the moment our eyes met. "Hey," she said cautiously, closing the door behind her. You're still up? Where were you? My voice was calm, but there was no mistaking the edge in it. She hesitated. I told you, I was out with friends. Which friends? Her hesitation deepened, and she set her things down on the table by the door. Alex, why are you interrogating me? I already told you. Stop lying, Lily, I snapped, my voice cutting through the room. I know you weren't with friends. I know you were with Eric. Her face paled, her mouth opening slightly as if to protest, but no words came out. The silence that followed was louder than any argument we'd ever had. I waited, my heart pounding as she tried to find something, anything, to say. How long has it been going on? I demanded, my voice softer now but no less sharp. How long have you been sneaking around with him? Alex, she trailed off, her eyes dropping to the floor. It's not what you think. Then what is it? I stepped closer, my hands clenched at my sides. Explain it to me, Lily. Explain the texts, the cafe, the park, the way you act around him. Explain the kiss. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide. Who? You followed me? I had to, because you wouldn't tell me the truth. I've been living in this house, feeling like a stranger, while you go off pretending everything's fine. And now I find out you've been lying to my face, meeting him behind my back. So yes, I followed you. And now I want answers. She took a shaky breath, her hands fidgeting at her sides. It wasn't supposed to happen this way, she said finally, her voice trembling. Eric, he made me feel something I haven't felt in a long time. Something I couldn't make you feel anymore? The words came out bitter, laced with anger and pain. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't deny it. Alex, you've been so distant. You're always working, always distracted. It's like I don't exist to you anymore. I've felt invisible for years. Invisible? I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. Do you even hear yourself? Do you have any idea what I've been doing? I've been killing myself at work, trying to provide for us, to give us a future. And you repay me by running into someone else's arms? It's not that simple, she said, her voice rising slightly. You don't see it, Alex. You're always so focused on everything else, your job, your deadlines, your own damn pride, that you forgot about us. You forgot about me. I forgot about you? I took a step back, my voice incredulous. Do you think this is easy for me? Do you think I don't feel the distance too? But instead of talking to me, instead of working through it, you go behind my back and start something with Eric? Do you even realize what you've done to us? Tears spilled down her cheeks as she wiped at them angrily. I didn't plan this, she said, her voice breaking. I didn't wake up one day and decide to hurt you. I've been lost, Alex. I've been unhappy for so long, and Eric, he listened. He saw me. I saw you, I said, my voice cracking. I've always seen you, Lily. But you didn't want to see me. The room fell silent again, the weight of our words hanging between us. I stared at her, trying to reconcile the woman I'd loved with the woman standing in front of me now. She looked broken, but so was I. And deep down, I knew we'd been breaking for a long time. So what now? I asked finally, my voice hollow. Do you want to be with him? Is that what this is? She shook her head, her tears falling freely now. I don't know, she whispered. I don't know what I want anymore. I felt something inside me snap, a tether that had been holding me to this life we'd built together. You don't know, I said bitterly. You've already made your choice, Lily. Whether you want to admit it or not, you chose him the moment you decided I wasn't enough. Don't say that, she pleaded, stepping closer. This isn't about choosing him over you. It's about us, about how we lost each other. No, Lily. You lost me the moment you gave up on us. My voice was cold, but inside, I was crumbling. She stopped, her hand hovering in the air as if she wanted to reach out to me but didn't know how. I didn't mean for it to end like this, she said softly. But maybe you're right. Maybe we've been holding on to something that doesn't exist anymore. Her words cut deeper than anything else she'd said that night. I turned away, unable to look at her. So that's it? I asked quietly. We're done. She didn't answer right away, and when she did, her voice was barely audible. I think we've been done for a long time. I nodded, my chest tight with a pain I couldn't put into words. "I'll stay with a friend tonight," I said, grabbing my coat and keys. "You can have the house." "Alex," she started, but I didn't let her finish. "Don't," I said, my voice firm. "Don't make this harder than it already is." I walked out the door, the cold night air hitting me like a slap. As I got into the car and drove away, I realized that this was the end, not just of our marriage, but of the life I thought we had. And as much as it hurt, I knew there was no going back. The morning after I left, the silence in my friend Mark's guest room was suffocating. I lay on the pull-out couch, staring at the ceiling, replaying the events of the previous night. My words to Lily, her tears, the finality of walking out, it all felt surreal, like a scene from someone else's life. But it was mine. My marriage was in pieces, and for the first time, I didn't know what came next. Mark didn't ask many questions, which I appreciated. He just handed me a coffee and said, "Stay as long as you need." That was the first kindness I'd felt in days, but it did little to lighten the weight in my chest. For the next few days, Lily and I didn't speak. I didn't reach out, and she didn't call. I kept myself busy with work, trying to drown out the noise in my head, but every quiet moment was filled with thoughts of her, of us, and of the mess we'd made of our lives. I wondered if she was thinking about me too, or if her thoughts were with Eric. The idea of her with him made my stomach turn, but there was nothing I could do about it now. On the fourth day, she texted me. "We need to talk." I stared at the message for a long time, unsure of how to respond. Did I want to talk? Did I want to open that door again? Part of me wanted to ignore her, to let the silence stretch on indefinitely. But the larger part of me, the part that still loved her despite everything, knew we couldn't leave things like this. We agreed to meet at a small cafe halfway between Mark's place and our house. When I arrived, she was already there, sitting at a corner table with a cup of tea in front of her. She looked tired, her face pale and her eyes red-rimmed, but she still managed a faint smile when she saw me. I sat down across from her, the tension between us almost palpable. "Thanks for coming," she said softly. I nodded, wrapping my hands around the coffee the waiter brought me. For a while, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched on, filled with everything we wanted to say but didn't know how to. Finally, she broke it. "I've been thinking about what you said. About how we've been holding on to something that doesn't exist anymore." I didn't respond immediately. Her words hung in the air, heavy and raw. "And?" I prompted, my voice low. "And I think you're right," she admitted, her voice trembling. "But I also think we owe it to ourselves to figure out why. To figure out who we are, apart from this mess." "You mean apart from each other?" I said, the bitterness in my voice surprising even me. Her eyes filled with tears, but she held my gaze. "Yes, maybe that's what we need. We've been hurting each other for so long, Alex. Maybe the only way to stop is to step away." The thought of separating, of truly being apart from her, hit me harder than I expected. As angry and hurt as I was, the idea of losing her completely felt unbearable. But deep down, I knew she was right. We'd reached a point where being together felt like ripping open wounds that never had a chance to heal. "What does that look like?" I asked, my voice quieter now. She hesitated as if she didn't want to say the words out loud. "I think we need to take a break. To live separately, to figure out who we are and what we want, without the weight of this marriage holding us down." I nodded slowly, the reality of her suggestions sinking in. "And Eric?" I asked, my tone sharper than I intended. Her face flushed and she looked down at her tea. "Eric was a mistake," she said finally. "A symptom of everything that's wrong, not the cause." I ended it. I told him I need to focus on myself, on us, on figuring out my own life. I didn't know if I believed her, but I let it go. There were bigger things to deal with now than her relationship with him. "What about the house?" I asked. "I'll stay there," she said. "At least for now. It's closer to my work and it's familiar. You can take whatever you need from it." "Generous of you," I said, unable to keep the edge out of my voice. She flinched, and guilt immediately followed my words. I sighed and rubbed a hand over my face. "Sorry. That was uncalled for." She shook her head. "It's okay. I deserve that." The conversation turned practical after that. We talked about splitting finances, about who would handle what bills. It was surreal, dividing up our lives like pieces of a puzzle that no longer fit together. By the time we finished, the weight of it all was suffocating. "I never wanted it to end like this," she said as we stood to leave. Her voice was soft, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. "Neither did I admitted. "But maybe this is the only way to start over." She nodded, and for a moment, it looked like she might reach out to hug me. But she didn't. Instead, we stood there, two broken people trying to find our way back to ourselves. When I returned to Mark's place, I felt hollow. The decision to separate should have brought relief, but it didn't. It felt like failure, like I'd let her down, let us down. But it also felt like a sliver of hope. Hope that maybe, with time and distance, we could figure out who we were meant to be. For now, though, all I could do was take it one day at a time.